Hello, everybody. Welcome. That was kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
So everything now will be, I don't know, anticlimactic. So quickly, thanks as usual. I can't see anything, of course, to the McKinnon Family Foundation for supporting this, the Lenzik, and the Santa Fe Reporter. I'm delighted to be here tonight with Diana Reiss, and I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll have a conversation. This is going to be technically challenging. We're interspersing video with our discussion, so it might go horribly wrong. So just bear with us. So Diana is professor at Hunter College. She's the author of the book Dolphin in the Mirror. She's one of the world's most thoughtful researchers on animal intelligence. I'm sure many of you have encountered her without knowing her. Perhaps best known for her work on marine mammals, principally dolphins, but she's also worked on elephants, and most recently my favorite and your favorite, cephalopods. Diana is a co-founder and chair of the Interspecies Internet, and she'll tell us a bit about that in a second. She's also a very outspoken advocate for animal welfare and the protection of cetaceans, and we'll come to this at the very end, I think. Diana was an advisor on the film The Cove, that some of you might have seen, a kind of horror film about human beings, essentially investigating dolphin hunting in Japan. So, Diana, why are you here? What are we doing? What's this all about? What was that all about?
Why am I here? So, first of all, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. So I've been here for over a week. We had a really remarkable conference in partnership with the Santa Fe Institute and the X Prize folks. Several months ago, this was back in the fall, we, the Interspecies Internet, I guess I should tell you about who we are. Interspecies Internet is an organization that was formed several years ago. The board members and my partners in crime, I like to say, are Vince Cerf, who was the co-founder of one of the co-founders of the Internet, Neil Gershenfeld, who is the director of the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, and Peter Gabriel, who is a musician. Most of you probably know him, but he's also a visionary, and he's been very interested in animal behavior, animal cognition, communication, and he actually was the first person to think about bringing a forum, an interdisciplinary forum of people together, from people who study animal cognition and behavior, AI scientists, philosophers, musicians, and others together, to really have this forum about how might we learn more about the animal mind. And the Interspecies Internet really focuses in two directions, and we're going to talk about those two directions tonight. One is interspecies communication, interspecies, which means how species may communicate with each other. How many of you have pets? It's very dark out there. I bet we have a lot of pet owners here, right? So you are communicating with your pets and they're communicating back. So that's interspecies. And there have been many scientists who've done studies teaching sign language to chimpanzees or forms of communication to other animals like African gray parrots and dolphins. That's interspecies. There's another path we take, which is intraspecies communication, and that's communication within a species themselves. How dogs communicate with other dogs, how dolphins communicate with other dolphins. So it's two paths, and they're both terribly exciting. So we've been running. We have a very active forum. We do monthly lectures. If you're interested, just look up Interspecies.io, and you'll see all of our activities. I guess it was last fall in September, we got a call from the X Prize, an X Prize team, and they had been following us and thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do an X Prize for having decoded the communication system of another species. They also felt that it would do a great deal if we could show that we could decode the communication of another species in terms of feelings of empathy and connectedness with other species. So that was that big idea. And I immediately called David and said, we really want to do this. Could we partner with SFI and do it at the Institute? And David said,
No.
right. Darn. No, David said yes, and he was very enthusiastic about this. So that started everything, and we just had the conference from the 28th through the 30th, and we brought scientists in from all over the world, and we had many members of the SFI community working, so it's been very exciting. So that's why we're here.
So that we are going to hear now, I believe this is the first video cue, we're going to hear from Peter, and then I think we're going to hear from a member of your team and a member of XPRIZE.
Hi, everyone. It's a fantastic opportunity to be with the Santa Fe Institute, and I wish I was able to be there in person, but it's exciting and great to see things moving. 100 years ago, the idea of talking to animals was the subject of a children's book, and today it's the subject of serious science. Mankind was often not smart enough to recognize non-human intelligence, and we managed to convince ourselves that real intelligence was unique to humanity. But that moment of separation, that spinning off from the natural world, was also the moment when we began to see all living things, all flora and fauna, as property, without any rights, as material that we could exploit in any way we chose. Whether as meat, shoes, handbags, entertainment, or sport, all were just resources for the greatest of the great apes, in other words, us. But in the last 50 years, a number of remarkable independent thinkers, pioneering researchers, working with all sorts of species, decided that there was plenty worth investigating and plenty worth trying to decode, and time after time provided clear evidence of non-human intelligence. It took us a long time to realize that the way we lived had been racist, had been sexist, and now we're beginning to see that we are speciesist, although we have to get a better word for that. Each time morality comes into question, so does a code of ethics. And as this community makes these wonderful discoveries, we need to make sure that we have some good ground rules established for our engagement. If we're to open up to collaborations with intelligent life whenever it occurs, we have to abandon our current worldview, which puts mankind right in front, center, and well above the natural world.
So I'm not sure this
My name is Kate Armstrong, and
good.
I am the Executive Director of Interspecies Internet, which is the convening body of this amazing event that we've been having over the last 2 or 3 days.
My name is Peter Houlihan. I'm the Executive Vice President of Biodiversity and Conservation at XPRIZE Foundation.
So Interspecies Internet is interested at looking at animal communications and the way in which this has evolved once we bring technology interfaces and the ability to decode into this really rich legacy of animal communications that we have. So our aim is to bring together a forum of humanities, scientists, artists, technologists to discuss and discover new ways to decode and to create interfaces for understanding the animal kingdom and nature as a whole.
I think that where AI has gone in the past 12 months is exponential. And, you know, if we can align that with enhancing our understandings of the animals and the world around us, I think it aligns with the timing of the challenges that we face in the world. So at XPRIZE, we focus on, you know, driving solutions to the grand challenges of our time and in this world and beyond. What we've been doing with humans leading this hasn't been working across the board, to say the least. And so if we could collaborate, if we could partner, if we could understand other species that exist in this world and use that to collectively, you know, build a more equitable, abundant future for all life on Earth, I think that's where this opportunity could align in a timing sense of, you know, harnessing these new tools in AI and using that to our advantage together with other species in the world to conserve and protect it in a way that hasn't been done before with the limited amount of time that we truly have to make a big difference.
you know, we all have this idea of the Dr. Dolittle, you know, talking to animals. But as AI becomes more and more embedded in our lives and embedded in the way that we're doing things, I think that this Dolittle idea becomes more and more realistic through the technology that we now have. And I do believe that the general public is also really understanding this. You know, we have examples of playback experiments with whales, in which, to a general public eye, this says, we had a conversation with a whale. This type of research is really driving an interest. And I believe that now, between the technology and this general public interest, we have a really renewed sense of energy around what we can do as a community and what we can actually drive forward, which is where XPRIZE comes in, because we hope, will be able to actually drive that forward with us as a community.
Okay, so let's just cover some. There's a very, XPRIZE is very technology focused, and this talk is not all about the positive aspects of AI, I should add. But there's this interesting fact that technology has allowed us to see a world that we would otherwise have been insensitive to, right? So technology is not the enemy, but in your work, clearly that's played an important role in opening up a whole realm of animal behavior.
Yeah, I think the promise of AI now is as a partner. So many of us have been working, many scientists around the world have been working to decode the natural communication systems of other animals or find interfaces for communication with them. And those interfaces are changing now. I think AI is exciting because it can show us perhaps new patterns that have been invisible to us before, because it can look at the complexity in systems. Once we see those patterns, then it still is up to scientists to go and ground truth them and see, do these patterns make sense in what we're seeing? How, for example, if we find patterns in dolphin, I study dolphins as we've said, if we find patterns in dolphin communication, again, like us, they use vocal signals. Like us, they use body language and spatial relationships. That's called multimodal communication. It's often hard to discern those patterns, particularly when you look at them in these complex societies in the seas. So perhaps we'll find new patterns using AI. But again, that human component, testing and seeing if these things work, because computers can find patterns that are meaningless. Vint Cerf, our partner on Interspecies, says computers can hallucinate, AI programs can hallucinate. We need to be careful in how we test. But it's an exciting time.
Okay, so we're going to jump in this. We're doing it in 3 sections: minds of animals, intraspecific and interspecific, even extraterrestrial, perhaps, communication. So in this section, I think we have 3 sets of videos. One on a task that you should describe, which is a sort of mirror self-recognition test, which is a test of the theory of mind.
Yep.
Both for dolphins and not elephants, that's another test, but insight learning in elephants, and then a section on play. So let's just talk a little bit about what this mirror self-recognition test is and why it's important, and then we'll show the video.
Great. Okay, well, first of all, I want to introduce you to my partner, and this is really my research collaborator. This is a bottlenose dolphin, and I've had the honor, I like to say, of working with these amazing animals. Dolphins, like us, are highly social. Like us, they've got big, complex brains. Like us, they use complex communication systems. And can I have the next slide for a moment? Okay, that's me with a really bad perm several years ago. I want to talk to you about my first encounter, what I call my first close encounter with a non-terrestrial intelligence, not extraterrestrial. These animals live totally in the seas. So I kind of joke about non-terrestrials. Again, their body forms are so different than ours. Again, their evolutionary history is so different than ours. Yet there is a pattern that connects us. So my first close encounter was with a dolphin named Circe. And I did my PhD in this country at Temple University, but I was fortunate to be able to go to a laboratory, a bioacoustics lab outside of Paris, where we study sound and how humans use sound and how other animals communicate using sound. And I had this idea that I was going to do an underwater keyboard for dolphins, and I'm going to talk about that a little later today. You might think, underwater keyboard for non-handed animal, that doesn't, okay, I'll explain how that worked later. But I wanted to first see how this dolphin was going to react to looking at visual forms. So I first had to teach her to, she was in a small marine zoo, and this was in the south of France, and she didn't know how to eat frozen fish that had been thawed. These were not live fish, and they said, in exchange for working with this dolphin, you need to train her to stop in front of you and eat fish. And I figured that's not too hard to do. So I was handed these giant Spanish mackerel, and Circe's head was about that wide, and I thought, well, that's not going to work. So I cut up the fish into 3 sections: heads, middles, and tail sections. And when I worked with Circe, so when she stopped, I put my hand in the water, and when she stopped and touched my hand, I began to feed her fish. If she swam away, my task was to get her to stay with me. And I didn't have a shared communication code. So if she did the wrong thing and swam away, I just would give her what I called a timeout. I would back away about 10 to 15 feet from the side of the pool, and I would just break social contact with her. It also broke her ability to get fish, and it was a way that I could say, you've done the wrong thing. And I did this, and she was really smart, and she quickly learned to stay at that location until I gave her a signal like this, which meant we're done. She learned quickly, as I said, and I was giving her consistently heads, middles, and tails, and she was eating everything. And but I found that she was spitting out the tails with the fins. So I decided to cut the little tail fins off, and then she really ate every tail. Okay, so everything's going really well. And then one day, I happened to throw Circe an uncut tail. It was an honest mistake. And she looked up at me, and she swam to the other side of the pool, took a vertical position, and just stared at me. And I looked back, and I'm thinking, is this possible that she's giving me a timeout because I did the wrong thing? I'm glad you all, if you had been there with me, you're laughing, and you would have probably felt the same way I felt. It was amazing. But that's an anecdote, and as a scientist, it's very hard to make any real, I couldn't really do anything with this. She eventually came back, and I continued to feed her, and I thought, but I could turn this into an experiment. And again, I was working on my PhD at the time, and I decided I was going to add this experiment. So what I did is I was really careful to cut all the tails perfectly and continue to give her the properly cut tails for the next couple days. But then I thought, well, I'll try this a couple more times, and I gave her an uncut tail. I did it 3 more times over the course of a couple of weeks. Every time I gave her an uncut tail, boom, across to the side of the other. She was giving me something that looked very much like a timeout. And it was fascinating because, when we think about communication, we don't know what the meaning of any one message is exactly. It's in our interpretation. And I can't tell you what it meant to Circe, but it functioned in a similar way that it functioned for me as a timeout. And that was my first encounter. And it really made me realize this is a magnificent mind to study. And it was an amazing experience. So I just wanted to share that first.
No, so let's go to the next. So I don't know if people are familiar with this idea, but one of the claims that has been made is that humans are unique by virtue of having a sense of self-awareness. And so when we look in the mirror, we're narcissistic. We see ourselves, we don't see someone else. Mm-hmm. And that ability to see oneself, Dan Dennett and others argued is evidence of conscious self-awareness. And so over the course of time, people did ingenious experiments, including Diana, to ask whether or not animals, when they're presented with a mirror, see others or see themselves. And I think that is the first clip we're now going to see. Caitlin.
So let me set this up a little bit here. Can we just hold that for one moment? So in 1970, Gordon Gallup did a breakthrough study showing we are not alone in the capacity for mirror self-recognition. And he showed it in our closest relatives, the great apes. So he showed it in chimpanzees, and then it was shown in gorillas and bonobos, which are pygmy chimpanzees, and orangutans. And then there was about a 40-year gap where it had been suggested that perhaps only our closest relatives would show it. But Gordon Gallup suggested maybe we'd find it in other big brain social species like the dolphin. And the first study I did was actually with two colleagues, Gordon Gallup and Laurie Marino, where we got suggestive evidence. We did a second study, and I'm going to show you the results here. So this is a dolphin. We exposed two dolphins at the New York Aquarium, part of the Wildlife Conservation Society, with mirrors. This is Presley. He's in front of a mirror, and the mirror you can sort of see with those two white bars. It's on the outside of his pool. This is a dolphin looking at himself at a mirror. He's actually marked on the side of his head. This behavior is very unusual for a dolphin. And he doesn't do this normally, and you have to do good baseline. Once he was marked, we started to mark him in other places. So we put a mirror in one end of a pool. He's being marked for the first time under his neck. And it's a tactile, it's a marker it's a children's marker that rubs right off. The dolphin that was marked, there are two dolphins in this pool. The dolphin that's marked Presley zips to the other pool where there's a mirror. Now, he's had plenty of time to recognize himself already and shown data. Now he's pulled back, and he's been looking at his the marked area. Now he's just using the mirror to look at his whole body. This is not a trained behavior. He's spinning in front of the mirror. He understands the principles of using a mirror. To see your whole body, you have to move backwards. Notice the other dolphin that's unmarked is not at the mirror at all. When we marked when we marked the second dolphin, he showed the same types of behaviors. And again, why is this important? Again, we have these behaviors that we show that we think are uniquely human, and we've now found that many, many behaviors that we thought were uniquely human, like tool use, like mirror use, are shared with many other species. Only a handful of species, however, have shown mirror self-recognition. So to date, we see it in great apes, as I said, in dolphins. We did it in elephants. My colleagues Franz Duval and Josh Plotnick and I showed it with Asian elephants. And magpies also show it, members of the corvid family. What's important about this is it's not only the ability to recognize yourself in the mirror, because it really takes, you have to learn something about your body movements. You have to have a sense of what we call proprioception, tracking your body movements in space and noticing that that other guy in the mirror is doing the same thing. And then using the mirror as a tool to look at yourself. It's not just recognizing yourself, but again, it's tool use. And we're used to looking at ourselves, looking at that, and how do we look when we do that dance move, or how do we look when we wear certain kinds of clothing? It's important to us. And it seems that other animals are also interested in that.
I mean, sort of amusing. Oh, this is one of those.
This is Bailey. This is a very young dolphin recognizing herself in a mirror and playing at the mirror. This is a two-way mirror. So we're looking through glass, she sees a mirror. And we did a follow-up study at the National Aquarium asking how old would a dolphin be when it first starts showing it. Can I just get the lights up for 1 second? How old, anybody in the audience know how old children are when they first start showing the ability for mirror self-recognition? 2, that's a good one. Anybody else that's a good guess, a little bit younger. As young as 18 months to 24 months. So you were right about 2 years. Between 18 and 24 months, these dolphins at the National Aquarium showed it at a younger age. Bailey, little Bailey, who I just showed you, started showing it at 7 months of age. And another dolphin that we exposed a mirror to at 14 months of age, Foster, showed it immediately. They had had experience with mirror reflections in their windows. But it doesn't mean they're smarter than us because they show it at a younger age. They're on a much faster course of development. Dolphins have to sort of hit the water swimming right away. And they're socially aware. They're mingling and being interactive with members of their social group at a much earlier age than children are. And that seems to correlate with when children start showing mirror self-recognition. As they get more socially aware, as they develop their proprioceptive skills, as they start showing empathy for others with increased social awareness, that's when it emerges. And because it was advanced and dolphins are precocious in this this development, we speculated that they would show it at an earlier age. So it was really fascinating to see that.
I mean, it's sort of interesting that we, as humans, when we see other animals being vain, we think, oh, they must be intelligent like us. So there's something ironic about it. But it seems quite natural. People watching that video responded to its behavior in the presence of itself.
These are patterns that connect us.
Yeah.
This dolphin couldn't be more different than us in body form, yet it's a pattern that connects. And we see those patterns more and more in other animals.
So, and on that topic, so I think, we might be either moving to elephants now or doing bubble ring play. Which one are we doing?
Bubble ring, I think.
Bubble rings.
Yeah.
Bubble rings. That's what we're doing. So this is kind of remarkable. You have to explain this because this is actually stupendous, actually, this one.
Believe it or not, this is a ring of air that a dolphin created. Yeah, non-handed, right? Yet, can we have the next slide? Here's another double ring. Dolphins have figured out how to use air in the water. Again, these are animals that live in the water. So I'm going to feel really old now, guys. So anybody here remember Betamax videos? This was back in the mid-'80s. I got my first Betamax camera. And as I lifted the camera in front of a group of dolphins I was working with, I saw this one female, Shiloh, go to the bottom of her pool and she took a horizontal position and she sort of popped her head up, and up came a silver air ring. And she followed it up, she swam around it, she went back down again, blew another ring, and I was able to catch it on video. I'm going to show you a video of these rings in just a moment.
I have seen the pictures you're about to see perhaps half a dozen times, and I still can't believe it. It has long been known that dolphins are highly intelligent and playful, but what do they play with underwater? Robert Krulwich is about to show you.
Okay, here it comes. Watch this. These dolphins at SeaWorld in Orlando are blowing perfect rings of air from...
Can we go back a little bit?
Yeah, sure. From the blowholes, you see that? In their heads.
Wow.
And apparently, dolphins do this for fun.
I mean, animals play, but this was really the first case we saw of an animal creating their own object of play from something they created themselves. That's no little thing.
Dolphins are toy manufacturers.
Watching what they do, this is definitely an intentional behavior.
Because, says Diana Reese, a dolphin expert, and Manu Prakash, a bubble expert, watch this dolphin using her nose. It's called a rostrum.
It's watching it, and at the same time it's doing something with its rostrum, very carefully and delicately.
But it's not touching it with the rostrum.
It's not touching it.
Just...
the spin is very clear.
Now, normally, because bubbles are lighter than water, they float up. But these dolphins, you notice, bite their bubbles, because the smaller the bubble, the longer it lasts. And if you slow things down, you can see the dolphin biting and then kind of stitching it back together again so it can keep playing with its toy.
Their goal is to keep these things intact and keep playing with it as long as they want.
And because rings stay intact when they're down deep under water pressure, these dolphins keep their rings near the bottom. And finally, you've got to see this.
So this female is going to force this air out. This is She's
Shiloh.
watching it as it rises, then puts her head in this position, pops another one out, it forms a hoop, and she swims through it.
Go back again.
Oh, absolutely. Let's see that again.
How cool is this?
Very cool. Robert Krulwich, ABC News, New York.
So that last one was the dolphin that we first saw. That was the first case of showing that a dolphin could create their own objects of play. Animals play. It's adaptive. But this was the first time anyone had found that the animals can create something themselves and play with it. So it's pretty astonishing. Can I show you one more? You're going to see an invention of another dolphin at the National Aquarium. I do field work. I study dolphins in the wild, but some of the work I do a lot of the work I did was in aquariums. This is Bailey, who you saw playfully spinning at the mirror. She's 2.5 here, and she found another way to create bubbles. As I said, they blow them out of their blowhole, which are their nostrils, at the top of their head. Watch how Bailey is doing this. See if you can spot how she does these. Anybody see how she's doing it? tail. She blows it out of her blowhole and kicks it with her tail. She's figured this out. None of the other dolphins did this in the pool. And this little 2.5-year-old did it for 45 minutes of continuous play. That really speaks to their attention span and intelligence. And again, non-handed, yet very creative. And it gets into toy play and creativity as well.
So actually, it's sort of interesting. So I want to mention a writer on animal minds who you admire, I admire very much, is Donald Griffin, and well known for his work on bat sonar and so forth. And it's interesting, when humans describe the behavior of other animals, there's a tendency, whatever reason we have, for describing them, the way Descartes actually described the animal world, as automata. We use foresight and insight and planning, and we have policies, whereas animals are just machines that are reflexive. And yet you look at this sort of behavior and you think, well, really? Why are humans so disinclined to accept the possibility that other animals have the kind of conscious experience that we have?
Yeah, it's odd, particularly because, as Don Griffin mentioned, Don Griffin was a dear friend as well, and he had said, you know, we have the same building blocks in our brains. Why do we think that there's this discontinuity? It's us thinkers, us communicators, and then the rest of the animal world devoid of this. It just doesn't even make any sense. I personally think we got it backwards from the beginning. No, but it is interesting, and I'm glad you brought up the part about planning in advance, because when we published this paper, this paper was a bunch of us who published it. It was my colleague Brenda McCowan and Laurie Marino and others. When we published this, we talked about this as a case of planning in advance, because when you see the animals taking that position and then creating this, it includes planning in advance, which is important.
So actually talk about planning, and this raises another issue about whether the task is, in some sense, cognitively salient to the species that we're dealing with. So we give exams, but they might not be the right exam for the species. They're not sensitive to their own particular perceptual apparatus. So I think we're going to go to an elephant now, and this is actually rather fun, and maybe describe this particular task.
Okay, I'm going to set this one up. I have to get up so I can point to this. Okay, so several years ago, this is an elephant. If you see this is browse baited with tasty fruits that we hung outside of the elephant's reach to see what would happen. This elephant showed insightful problem solving by taking this cube and moving it right under the browse to get this treat. Now, what we did was we put a number of items, including a bunch of sticks in here. We also got rid of the cube and put this very heavy tire that was so heavy we needed a truck to move it in. In the absence of a cube to stand on to reach the branch, this is Condola. He was captive born at Smithsonian's National Zoo, is where we did this. Look how precise he is. He knows just where he's going with this. And voila, he's got it. We removed things that he could stand on. Again, there's sticks here the whole time. Oh, you can see them on the ground. We gave him some butcher blocks that could be stacked. And in the absence of anything that he could stand on, he proceeded to stack the blocks. Now, many years ago, Wolfgang Köhler did the first study at Tenerife showing that our closest relatives, the great apes, would stack things to get bananas that were hung high above their heads. That was the first time anybody had reported insightful problem solving in a non-human species, the great ape. What was interesting about this, you can see Condola doesn't quite get it. He should have stacked one more, but look at this effort of getting this. So what's interesting here is that before we did this study, there had been three other studies where people only gave elephants sticks to solve different kinds of problems. And elephants are big tool users, and they use sticks for a lot of things. They use sticks to scratch their back and to do certain kinds of things, to pry open things that are in front of them. Yet, they weren't using them in an insightful way on certain kinds of problems. And that led some researchers to suggest that maybe elephants had a savant type of brain because they have great memory for spatial movements and where they have to go, and they've shown good memory for other things, yet they weren't showing insightful problem solving. One of the doctoral students in my lab, Preston Furter, and I did this study thinking maybe we should give them some choices rather than saying, use sticks to do this. And when we gave the elephant choices, they never touched a stick the entire time. So if we had just given them sticks, they would have failed. Yet if we let elephants show us what they wanted to do. Now, here's the key. It turns out that elephant trunks, the faces and trunks of the elephant are loaded with neurons, okay? And the elephant trunk has two little fingers, two little points that can pick up something as thin as a dime off the ground. So for an elephant, if they picked, and oh, by the way, the tip of their trunk, they have the best visual acuity for near range things at the tip of their trunk. They can smell with the tip of their trunk and they can pick things up. So for the elephant, it seemed that it was important to be able to get its trunk where it had to be to get those tasty treats. Had they picked up a stick, it wouldn't have been they wouldn't have had as good vision to get what they wanted. They couldn't have handled or smelled the item. So I think we have to try to think like those animals. We're not that species, but I think the more we can apply what we know about their sensory capabilities and what they do in their own natural world, and give them problems to solve that make sense for them. It's what you were saying before, David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now we've given some evidence of animal minds that shouldn't surprise anybody, but still surprise people for weird reasons. And we're going to move to what they say to each other, that is intra-specific, within species communication. And I think we're going to start this with some videos as well.
They do produce what's called a chorus howl, where all of them howl together, but they use different sounds to do that. It's not just howl, howl, howl. And they also howl as individuals. So you can think of it as sometimes I'll talk to myself, sometimes I'll talk to one person, sometimes there will be a group of us talking all at the same time. There are one of a few animal species that do this coordinated vocal communication event, but they also talk as individuals as well.
In my lab, I work on kind of interdisciplinary work on AI, language, humans, and animals. Part of Project SETI, and we're looking at sperm whales. And sperm whales are these amazing creatures. They dive very deep. They dive up to 1 kilometer deep or even more for like 45 minutes, and they eat giant squid there. They have extremely complex social structures. They have matrilineal societies where mother forms families and clans, and they babysit each other's offsprings, and the calves are with mothers for a very long time, 8, 13 years. They have the largest brain in the animal kingdom. And the really cool thing about them is that they vocalize before they hunt and when they socialize. So the idea is that maybe there's something really meaningful that they're exchanging in those vocalizations.
I just start with the base fact of if you're traveling to another culture and you don't know the language, and most of us have experienced that, right? It is very difficult to totally understand the culture without learning its language, right? And that's a hard thing to do, to learn a second language. It's the same with animals. Like if you want to start really observing animals and understanding them, you have to understand their communication strategy. And humans rarely do that with animals. In the same way, we're always afraid of another language because it's scary, right? You don't know if people are talking about you, you don't know what they're really saying, and it's intimidating, right? It's the same with animals. So we come up with phrases like bird song, and they're not singing. It has nothing to do with song. Frankly, it's like, get the hell out of here. You know, it's a territorial call, or come sleep with me, right? Mate with me. That has nothing to do with song. So our fear of getting engaged in the animal world and understanding it and seeing it through their eyes, it starts with just being humble and going and sitting and hanging out with them.
The real exciting thing about this animal communication in general is that basically it's an exercise for understanding something very unknown, something very mysterious, right? We have all this data. We have animals that are communicating with each other. They're seemingly very structured ways they communicate with in many ways. But we have no idea what they're saying. And basically what we do with our artificial intelligence modeling is, in a sense, an exercise for how you approach a communication system, something you don't know anything about, and just try to decipher it. We have 3 players. We have humans, animals, and machines, and they're really informative, and they inform each other, and we can learn so much about animals with the help of AI and us humans. And most importantly, I think, we can learn about artificial intelligence from how we learn, how humans learn.
I'm lucky enough to spend most of my life in rainforests and mountain habitats in Africa with chimpanzees and gorillas. Having just been out there for a long time, I'm now back in civilization talking to lots of really interesting people, and unfortunately that means I've lost the one thing that I want to use to communicate right now. But luckily the main focus of my research is non-vocal communication. If you're on a telephone talking to someone that can't even see you, your hands are going to be moving. Gesture is intrinsic to the way we communicate. And actually, as it turns out, for other apes, it's even more important. So when you're spending time with chimpanzees, with gorillas, with bonobos, a lot of the core meaning that they're communicating is actually in their gestures. And a lot of the affect and intonation and arousal is going on in their vocalizations. So just like us, they're communicating multimodally with both of those things. But if you want to explore meanings, things like come here, go away, give me that, basically all those little social nuances of how you make your way through your day, other apes are doing a lot of that with their gestures.
It's funny, I haven't told Diana this, but so SFI, we're theorists, we're all sort of mathematically minded, and I was looking at all these speakers, incredible people, and trying to work out from looking at them which animals they worked on. And with Jeff, it was obviously worked on wolves. He looks like one. He's basically a feral human being, as far as I can tell.
Well, tell Jeff that.
He would be flattered if you told him that. And then Gaspar's got a kind of Danish whale look to him. I don't want to say Kate looks like a chimp, but she gestures like one. But okay, so this bit we're going to talk about intraspecific communication. But let's start with a slightly odd story that you've worked on, which is intraspecific communication in humans that resembles intraspecific communication in dolphins, and that's whistling. And so human beings, there are societies where they need long-distance communication with poor visibility, and they communicate by whistling. Tell us a bit about that and why that seems relevant to decoding the intraspecific communication in dolphins.
Great. So many years ago, a man I studied with, I told you I was in France, his name's René Guy Busnel, he and his colleagues reported that there are places in the world, as David said, where people speak tonal and non-tonal languages, many different languages, but they whistle, they reported that they whistle their languages when they're in distances where the spoken word can't carry. So these generally occur in mountainous regions. So if Jose is on a mountaintop and Juan is in the valley, Jose will whistle the grocery list, for example. And they thought that it was just whistling the intonation or the musicality of the sentences. Many years later, a French anthropologist named Julien Mayer, who again lives in the south of France, met with Busnel, continued his work, and took it much further, and now has shown that they actually whistle articulated speech. You wouldn't think it, looking at this, when you look at these whistles, remember I showed you those sonograms, well, I'll show you some sonograms, those pictures of sound. They whistle, when you look at it, it looks like birdsong or dolphin whistles. You would be sure it was an animal call, yet it's articulated human speech. I'm not a great whistler, so I'm not going to be able to do it for you, but Julian was just at our conference. He did this incredible demonstration, and there are about 90 languages in the world that are whistled in these environments. So Julian and my colleague at Rockefeller University that I work with on dolphins and now octopuses as well, we teamed up with Julian and we wrote a paper a couple of years ago talking about how human whistle language could give us insights into decoding dolphin whistles and whistles of other species. So here's the issue. When you look at these sound pictures, we're looking at pitch over time, and we're looking at these whistles. First, okay, let me back up. Let me make one point first. For many years, linguists who study language would look at human whistled speech and they'd say, these can't carry any real information like human language. These look like really simple whistles like other animal calls, and maybe it's emotional information it conveys. And this has been an idea about animal communication for a long time, that whatever signals they do use, it's probably just emotional rather than referring to things in the environment in any kind of complex manner. So again, linguists are looking at this envelope. What could you possibly encode there? Now we know you can encode in this kind of signal. Secondly, when we look at these human whistles, for us who study other languages of animals or communication systems of other animals, we tend to look at their signals and decide this is an element if there's silence between the different elements. So if you hear birdsong or dolphins whistle and we see, then if it's silent between, we say, well, this is one element, this is another element. When you look at whistled speech, they may combine one word with a second word, and it looks like one whistle. It may be two words, but they're whistled together. So again, when we hear these whistles and when we process human whistles, it's a psychoacoustic process. If you know the language, you know where to parse it. So I'm talking really quickly now, and if you didn't know my language and you heard me say, the cat ran up the hill, you wouldn't know where one element is. And again, this is a problem we have when we try to decode other animal signals. We don't know the language. We don't know how to parse. So this is a way to sort of open up our minds to think, well, maybe we need to really understand, find better ways to figure out what are the individual units by which this information is encoded. And it's really hard. How do you figure out, looking at a dolphin or looking at birdsong, what's meaningful to them? Because if we're going to decode, we want to be able to distinguish or delineate those individual elements, see if and how they may be combined to express different messages.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something I worked on many years ago, which is the mathematical structure of languages, and the way that linguists will talk about this is as compositional or combinatorial. So if you think about syntax and grammar, what we do is we have phrase structure. And so you're using the same symbol, but by changing the context, you change the meaning. And I just wanted to, as a footnote, because you sent me that paper today, Diana, one of the great pioneers in demonstrating what looks like combinatorial structure in the coders of whales, the sperm whales, Roger Payne. And I mention this partly because, for those of you who have come to these things before, one of Cormac McCarthy's best friends was Roger Payne, and Cormac was obsessed with whales and whale intelligence, non-human intelligence generally, because he's despaired, if you've read his novels, of human intelligence. And I just wondered if you just talk, because he passed away, in fact, shortly before Cormac, Roger. Say a few words about Roger Payne, because he's one of these extraordinary people.
Yes, Roger, first of all, Roger was an amazing scientist who inspired so many of us. I was very lucky that he was one of my best friends, and we were really quite close. And Roger, just for those of you who don't know, Roger was, and his wife Katie Payne and Scott McVeigh, discovered humpback whale song. And not only did they discover it, and it was published in Science magazine in 1970, but even before it was published, Roger had the amazing insight into try to share that information with the public worldwide, and he made the album Songs of the Humpback Whale, which is still considered the best-selling environmental album. So it wasn't just being a great scientist and doing the work, but understanding you need sometimes to translate our findings to get people to understand and appreciate these amazing animals. And that's kind of a theme that runs through it for a lot of us now. We really do feel that it's important for us to speak out and sort of voice what those species can't put into their own words, so to speak, and share that. But Roger was a great inspiration for so many of us. So, yeah.
So one of the things that you then did is you took this to another level and you built whistling keyboards. And so to communicate, or actually not to communicate, to allow them to communicate spontaneously. And so I know we have some videos, and then you're going to describe this.
I'm going to get up again. Okay. So, thanks. So, again, remember, my work was involved. I wanted to decode dolphin communication, and I spent a lot of my early work studying dolphins in their own environment. I studied them in the wild, and we studied them in aquaria to try to decode, so we would record their signals, their body language, their vocal signals, use computers to analyze their whistles. And now, again, we have AI to help us. But this was in the mid-'80s, okay, 1983. I had just gotten my PhD. I was in Paris, as I told you, working with Circe and other animals. I came back knowing they could visually discriminate these forms, and I built this underwater keyboard. And I published this with one of my doctoral students, who you'll see in this footage a little bit, Brenda McCowan. She joined me on this adventure. This was an idea not to train dolphins, but rather what happens if we give these really big-brained social animals choice and control, let them control us, let them control the system. So first it took observation, seeing what things they might want to obtain, and then give them agency to be able to ask for it. But we took it a step further. So here's this underwater keyboard, interfaced with fiber optic cables into an Apple II computer. Boy, do I feel old. Apple II computer, we could barely do it. When the dolphin pushed a symbol, the symbols were repositioned minute by minute, so they had to learn what symbol represented what, not just the position. And there's a fiber optic cable. So the whole thing, because I'm really into animal welfare, was run on a light bulb. Okay, if they touched the symbol, it broke a light beam, and it would be scored on the computer. Now, they push a symbol. Can I get the next image? Just this is how it would work. So these were the various symbols. If they pushed the triangle, they would hear a whistle. I hope you heard. And they got a ball. If they pushed the H, they would hear a different signal, and they would get a rub from us, and or a ring. So that's the basics. This is a piece from Nature, and it's showing the underwater view for the dolphins of, this is Delphi and Pan. They were born in our facility. We looked at their own communication system and how it developed. And then when they were 11 months old, we introduced them to this underwater keyboard. And they could get these objects, they would hear the sounds, and they could do whatever they want. Sometimes they played with us. Sometimes they did their own kinds of behaviors. This is Delphi right here. He was a big dribbler. He used to like to dribble on the side, but they would play with us as well. And what we found was that very quickly they started imitating the sounds that they were hearing. We didn't train them to do this. We just let them explore the contingencies of using this keyboard, and they had agency. So they could push a triangle, hear, and get a ball. Push the rub, it's different, my whistling is bad, and we'd give them a tickle. They love to get tickled. They'd love to get tickled on their tongues or their bodies, and they would roll over. This is a sonogram. Each of these white boxes is a representation of sound, and on the vertical axis, from bottom to top, it's an increase in frequency or pitch, and from left to right, it's time. So there's that big W. Pan was at the keyboard. It was Pan and Delphi, these two young dolphins born in our facility. Again, we knew their vocal repertoire. We, by the way, also showed that dolphins, if you watch their vocal development, they babble. They show the same kinds of patterns that birds and humans do when they acquire their sounds. They're vocal learners like us. They babble, they play with sounds as they're acquiring their vocal repertoire. So the sounds we gave them did not look like the sounds the adults were doing or that we were doing, or that they were doing, but they were within the time and frequency domain that they could produce them. So we wanted to meet them on their own level by using whistles. So in the top, you're seeing Pan has just hit the key, the H key, and heard, and he puts his contact call after it. Dolphins each have their own contact call, which we think are kind of function as identity calls. So people will say, when I would show them, well, is Pan saying, tickle me? I don't know. We saw this often, but not always. Again, we simply don't know what it means to a dolphin. But interestingly, what we found was, I'm holding this up like it's a microphone. What we found was this W was not the computer, this was Pan. And I was changing the symbols on the keyboard, and he started rubbing on my arms and whistled rub Pan. So they started using these signals in their own repertoire. Sometimes they would produce them before they hit the matching key. They actually never produced rub when they hit the wrong key or ball. They understood that they had learned relationships between the sounds, the visual forms, and the objects they got. Let me take it a step further. Can I have the next? This is Delphi, one of the other young males, and they were still with their moms at the time. Delphi and Pan, in the second year of a 2-year study, developed a new game. What they would do is they'd stay at the keyboard, they'd hit for a ball, and then they'd stay there and then hit for ring, take them together. You see he's got the ball and ring in his mouth. This is a dolphin game. And they would toss it up into the air and catch it in their mouth at the same time. This may seem simple, but it's actually pretty complicated. And they did this during the second year. Now, look at the next slide. During that time, we saw a new whistle appear, and it appeared to be ring and ball in one combined whistle. David, you were just talking about this kind of combinatorial whistle. And it wasn't just once, and it only happened, we only got this in context when they were playing with balls and rings in this game that they had created where the objects were together. Now, what does that mean? Why is that important? Remember, we're trying to decode, and we don't know the units they're using, and we don't know whether they work combinatorially. And this was the first time we had evidence that they may in fact combine signals into one signal. We ran 33 sessions that second year of the study when this was observed, and we have lots of evidence of them producing this whistle across those sessions in that particular context. So it may serve as a cipher for us, or a way in to look at their own signaling system. So that's why this is an interactive system where we're actually engaging with the animals and asking basically, show us what you're doing. What will you do with this if we turn over choice and control? It's kind of like what we did with the elephants, giving them control over what objects they can use. And I think that's a really great way to work with these animals. Let's partner with them instead. Okay, I think was there one more here? I think that was the end of the keyboard.
Yeah,
Caitlin, do we have
and I think we have something from Brendan now, actually.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about the humpback whales is because we're trying to take a sort of two-pronged approach. One is doing what many people do, which is a lot of passive, acoustic, or other types of monitoring of behavior, and trying to find filters that can help us better understand animal communication systems and how they're structured and organized and their meaning. But the other, which is what I really wanted to emphasize here, because others are talking about sort of the AI approaches and all those other approaches, is the use of engagement with these animals in the form of things like acoustic playbacks. And what we did was a very simple thing, which was we took an exemplar, a high-quality exemplar that we had recorded the day before from this local population, and we used it in a standard playback study design where we do a playback and post period in order to show sort of the causality of the interaction. Once we started playing this exemplar, we had a whale approach, and after 3 exemplars, playing back through an underwater speaker and a computer system, we simply played it back and starting in random fashion. And then once the animal responded with a very strong whoop in response, we began sort of dynamically playing back in a very simplistic way because we didn't have a lot of degrees of freedom to change the way we were doing it. We changed the timing of it so that we could see if the whale might match our timing, and we kept trying to match her timing, and we ended up doing this sort of synchronous or really asynchronous time matching, temporal matching between the two of us. And one of the reasons why we think she was so responsive, this humpback whale named Twain, is because this call had come from a group that she was in the day before. So I think if we're going to really engage these animals, we should be using their communication systems to engage them with. There's been a lot of work done with artificial signals, especially in captive contexts, and it's given us a lot of really great information about some of the units and structure and organization of their communication systems. But I think ultimately, if we want to decode another animal's communication system, we need to use their own signals to ask them very, questions about how they structure those systems.
Yeah, it's funny, when Brenda was showing us the video of this back and forth sort of duetting with a whale, and I was reminded of that, and it segues into our third part, that final scene in Close Encounters, where we're communicating with aliens musically.
Yeah.
Right? We're not doing that Gary Larson thing when you're talking to your dog and it's blah, 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 Fido, blah, 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 Fido. Right. We're just completely insensitive to this requirement that we use very different contexts and very different modalities. And I think we're going to hear a little bit on this whole issue of the appropriate context for communicating now, I think, in perhaps Brandon.
In some ways, being a gesture person, thinking about multimodality gives me an advantage because gestures are multimodal. So I can give silent gestures, and audible ones, and tactile ones. And so we're dealing with the multimodality problem all the time just as a gesture person. But then you've got to go to the next level and put together, okay, the next level of modality is putting together gesture with vocalization, with body posture, facial expression, let alone the modalities we're not even thinking about a lot of the time. So olfaction or ultrasonic communication, communicating in the UV, the kind of things we're not sensitive to. So we're only ever getting a fraction of the message, a fraction of the meaning, if we're paying attention to one of those modalities. So we're going to see the whole picture come together when we can put that all together. On the one hand, being a gesture person means we take a different perspective, and we're already dealing with some of those challenges of integrating sound and vision and touch. But until we get to the point where we're really combining across all of those different modalities, yeah, that is a complex problem to solve. And it's going to require us to think about different timescales. It's going to require us to think about different channels of communication and all of that context that we're in, so the noisiness of the environment and all those different aspects are going to have to come together if we're going to solve this problem.
So anyone that's ever kind of lived with another person, be they a family member, a partner, a roommate, knows, right, that even human beings over the course of a day, right, have different sorts of ways of communicating. People who are not morning people, for example, say, ask me later on, which means everything about the way organisms function is profoundly influenced by context, not only from setting to setting and across geography and time, but even over the course of a single day. And I think communication is especially, right, amenable to that sort of kind of capriciousness. It would be amazing if I could understand how a whale or a dolphin or a chimpanzee kind of communicated on any given day of any given month in any given setting. That is amazing, and we are already making a lot of progress. But unfortunately, but also fortunately, because this is where the scientific breakthroughs come in, it's not unlikely that they're going to vary in the same ways that we do, if not more, right? So the challenge will be in kind of understanding some basic rules that govern the way this communication happens, and then being able to pivot and add and modify and improve as we learn how that kind of changes across contexts.
Yeah, and so I mean, did you want to?
No.
No, I mean, it's this. One of the questions that comes up here is, there's a paradox known as the Fermi paradox. Many people have heard that, and if the universe is teeming with life, why have we not heard them?
Yeah.
And it's worth bearing in mind that we make huge scientific discoveries when we discover a new source of data, or we invent a new technology, or we become sensitive to a different context. RNA interference, the discovery of the importance of the microbiome. I mean, think about that, the microbiome as an organ. That's a couple of decades old, and that's a huge discovery. And so now we're going to move a little bit to discussing a harder topic, which is communication across species. You've been doing it in some sense, Diana, but now perhaps moving to my favorite, which are cephalopods. And everyone's favorite, actually, Oliver Sacks, many of you know, the neuroscientist. Actually, his dad was my grandmother's doctor, which is kind of funny. Yeah, and so that I have a personal connection to Oliver Sacks. But But he has a T-shirt that he very proudly wear, which I want a copy of, and it says, "Welcome to our cephalopod overlords." And I guess he must have watched the film Arrival and realized that we should be friendly with these things. So you've been moving to, and this is not repeated yet, it's early results, but to some remarkable discoveries in captive octopus, and I hope you'll show some videos and tell us a bit about what this is.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, I primarily work with the non-handed cetaceans, right? Suddenly 8-armed cephalopods. Okay. All right, I'm new to this game, but I've been working with my colleague Marcelo Magnasco at the Rockefeller University, and Jennifer Mather, who is an expert in cephalopods. She's my octopus teacher, frankly, and she was actually the advisor for the film My Octopus Teacher. We started wanting to do a study to give octopuses is the plural, choice and control. We're still trying to figure out how to do that. But in the course of, Marcelo Magnasso, again, my collaborator, started an octopus lab, and my students and I are working there with him. We have recordings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we can see them because we use infrared, so we can see them at night. One of my doctoral students, who is now doing his postdoc with Marcelo, noticed that the tank was filled with ink one night. We went back, looked at all the tapes, and discovered what might be considered an sort of an abnormal kind of dreaming state. So let me just give you a little bit more information. Several years ago, another group of scientists suggested that these aliens to us, the octopuses, might actually show a kind of sleep state that we call REM sleep, where in REM there's active eye movement and there's some activity. We're not moving out of the bed generally, although these things are, often you'll see what are called parasomnias, which are abnormal behaviors in sleep. Sleepwalking is a kind of parasomnia. It suggests that someone is dreaming. And so REM sleep has been suggested in the octopus. What we've now seen is the possibility that they may actually be dreaming. And so I'm going to show you some footage. We have this now. We put a paper out just in what's called bioRxiv. We got it in a second octopus now. Let me just show you. There's an octopus up here. This is one view on this side. Here's an octopus in quiescent or quiet sleep. It's rather light colored. And then the octopus is back here. Same octopus, different view. This octopus drops down from quiet sleep, and it's been shifting color. When they shift colors in sleep, like this, you see this color shifting? It's still sleep in a sleep state. This is called active sleep. Something's going on, and this has been reported by others, but now we're seeing it dropping down and showing this is defensive behavior, like an anti-predatory behavior, where they kind of cover their more vulnerable parts. These guys are extremely vulnerable. Now you can see the octopus here in this defensive, almost like it's protecting itself from something. We've seen this several times, and then you're going to see another defensive behavior, ink being ejected. Boom. So we saw this, thank you, we can get the lights up. We saw this several occasions now in 2 animals, and it may be a parasomnia. And what we talked about, is it possible like a nightmare type of scenario? We don't know for sure. This is a hypothesis, and we're hoping others will also look for this now. Sometimes we don't, unless you put out these observations. You know, we wanted to put them out so others could look as well. But now that we have it in a second animal, it's even stronger evidence that something else is going on there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons it's profound, right, is that, you know, in the Skinnerian worldview, animals are just input-output machines, right? And they don't have internal representations of the world. And what you see in these parasomnias, or appear to see, is enacting an internal representation of a complex set of stimuli in the absence of the stimuli, presumably at some time in the past. So it's actually an extremely profound insight if it turns out to be true.
Yeah, we're really interested. So I think one of the keys here is to record the animals 24/7, or you might miss it.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you one more example of how we can miss things. Several years ago, we published another paper showing the first evidence of whisper-like behavior in non-human primates. You know what little cotton top tamarins look like? They're adorable. They were, we found this, and many years prior to this, the evolutionary biologist Dawkins had suggested maybe we would see evidence of whispering, what he called conspiratorial whispering between other primate species, okay? So that their messages couldn't be overheard. And we actually found this, and it was quite fascinating because, again, it's really hard to see if they're whispering in the wild. We probably wouldn't even see it. So that, you know, these kinds of things sometimes happen, but you have to be ready to be able to capture it. We actually tested for that, yeah.
So I'm just going to ask one final question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So your career has been a kind of enormous Darwinian expansion of our empathy for non-humans, and more people should do what you do. I mean, you know, I'm going to do this in my garden. I'm going to just set little traps for ants, not traps, but I guess little keyboards for ants and so on. Because who knows, right? I mean, we're just not being imaginative, quite frankly, and just very inspiring work. And but it has enormous ethical implications. And I opened with talking about The Cove. You know, and this won an Oscar. This is a film that won an Academy Award for giving us an insight into the inhumanity of humans and the humanity of cetaceans, or the cetaceanness of some humans like you. Do you want to talk a little bit about, if you take this kind of work to its limit, and we come to understand just the enormous diversity of ways of being in the world, intelligently being in the world, emotionally being in the world, and so on. It has massive ethical implications in terms of how we behave to the rest of animate nature, including to our own species. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, I mean, looking forward? And the reaction to that film, which was not all positive.
Correct. Yeah, so I mean, when you, again, we were talking about this earlier, that as scientists, if we can share our discoveries with the public and politicians and other, you know, across geographic borders, you know, will that make a difference? How do we do it in a way that people will be eager to change their behavior? And you know, it's easy to say, oh yeah, well, I won't buy this because I don't think people in factories are, are being treated well, and we want to be ethical. But when people have their cultures based, a lot of their cultural practices based on this kind of hunting or this kind of killing, you know, how do we get them to change their mind? And I think we have to create powerful narratives that let them relate to these animals. You can't force people to change. I think we have to find ways of speaking to their hearts and their minds, and that's not easy. In The Cove, I told the director, we were trying to stop these dolphin drive hunts. My colleagues and I had this effort, had been trying, and we had zoos and aquariums trying to talk to other zoos and aquariums in Japan to try to get them to stop. There were a lot of people who were working on this. When I told the director, Luis Hoyas, about The Cove, he was going to make a film about the environment that he hoped would make a difference. And I jumped on him. I was at a conference talking about these dolphin drive hunts. And I jumped on him and I said, you got to see this stuff. He called me a couple weeks later, decided to make the film. And, but I think the way the film was made didn't give the Japanese, I mean, I think it's a fantastic film. But I think it was difficult for the Japanese government to say we're going to stop. They actually dug their heels in more. And I think we have to find other ways to work from within communities, within countries themselves, and change minds. I think we have to have a gentler way of doing it, personally. I'm hopeful that we'll get there. I'm an optimist, and I feel like science can really help us. You know, I think this idea of translational science is critical, though, and science should be able to transfer across geographic boundaries. Science isn't one way in one country and not in Japan or not in another country. There are countries now, like India, who have declared human rights for cetaceans, and cows they've revered for years. I'm hoping that will spread more and more.
Thank you very much, Dana.
Thank you.
So we're going to take some questions. I'm not sure how this works, but is Caitlin going to come? Someone, Melissa, fantastic.
A two-part question. Have you ever observed animals communicating in a judgmental way or in decision-making? Also, given that we live in a eat or be eaten world, have they ever employed communication for survival?
Okay, so in terms of judgmental ways, I'll speak with the animals that I know, but there are many projects, there are many studies that have shown decision-making strategies for animals. In terms of foraging, animals will often go where they have more animals going in one direction. There's quite a good deal of literature, particularly in ungulate species and many other species. Whether they're using particular signals to communicate is, I can't speak to that, but often you'll see members will follow when a larger group goes in one direction. In terms of judgmental, I'll give you an interesting example. Frans de Waal has a beautiful paper with Sarah Brosnan. By the way, Frans de Waal was an amazing primatologist and a wonderful observer of animal behavior and communicator of his findings. We also lost him recently. And Frans was also a collaborator on that on the MIR study I did with elephants, as I mentioned. So he was a big inspiration to me and many others. He did this really remarkable study where they gave monkeys differential rewards for doing the same task. This is a very famous study. And one monkey, for doing a task, and it was in an adjacent cage with another monkey, got a cucumber, while the other monkey got some preferred other treat. And the monkey that got the cucumber looked at the other animal getting the treat and threw the cucumber back. You know, this kind of judgment of inequality. So that's a classic study, and you can see those videos online. They're terrific.
Thank you. I thank you so much for taking on this topic. I just want to recommend the book An Immense World. If you have not read An Immense World, I highly recommend it, and I also highly recommend seeing The Cove. It is an incredible film, one of the best I've seen.
Yeah, that's by Ed de Jong, right?
Thank you.
Hello. I guess we're all going to be mentioning books, but several years ago, David Quammen wrote a book called Monster of God, in which he looks at, not very analytically, but he just sort of records his observations about the relationships between humans and the things that are our greatest, that are apex predators that can destroy us. And I guess what's most compelling about that is that, of course, he posits the fact that as we've succeeded in eliminating most of these apex predators, it changes our worldview entirely. So in other words, if there was the potential for studying why other species see us as prey, and how does that affect us, that would be an interesting behavioral study, because if we've made the world safe for humans, it completely changes the frame of reference we have for studying other animal behavior, it strikes me. So if you'd care to comment about that.
Yeah, do you want?
Well, no, I just as a reflection on that, I remember Bruce Chatwin, before he wrote In Patagonia, he was writing a book on human cooperation as a response to being preyed upon by saber-toothed tigers. And so very much along those lines, that actually social structure evolved as a sort of defense reaction against an apex predator of the kind you're describing. I'm not sure. He actually never published that book. He went on to do other things, but just reminded of that.
Interesting, yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. Great talk. Thank you very much. So have you tried recording like you said, the 24-hour activities as well as the vocalizations, and then encoded that somehow with the computer to then help you decode where the words are, where one vocalization stops and next one starts? Like up and down, left and right, hunting, eating, and whatnot?
Let me make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying if we record 24/7 and record all their vocalizations and their behaviors, can we find some meaning in that? Is that what you're...
Yes, and use the computers to help correlate that.
Yeah, that's the idea. And a lot of us have done recordings, but it's not as simple as you think. It's amazing. First of all, as we said, and as you heard Kat, who was talking about gestures, we use this multimodal communication, and so do other animals. And I think, again, this is where I think AI may be really useful, because if it can recognize movement, which we think you can recognize movement, there are programs like that now, and sound, that could be extremely helpful at looking at patterns over time. You know, I was super naive when I first started. I thought, this is how goofy I was. I got to the first lab and I thought, okay, I'm gonna put a hydrophone in the water, which is an underwater microphone, and I'm just gonna record the dolphins all day. Or I'll offer them objects and see how they respond. You don't get these clear responses. And again, we really don't know the individual elements that they're using and how they're organized. We're missing something. Although on the other hand, I can tell you when you watch them, the more you observe and get yourself out of the way and just observe them and listen, we do see patterns. You know, and I often felt like I was Howard Cosell, you know, the sports commentator. I'd be standing there and I'd say, and Circe's going in this direction, and we'd find ways of coding their behavior. There's some predictability you can see that often does, you know, where you feel like you're starting to get there, at least with their behavior and some of their vocalizations, but we're not there yet. It's a lot harder than you think. So I'm really hopeful that this partnership between AI scientists and approaches and people who are very familiar with watching the animals and some of the nuances, I'm hoping that we're going to make some advances. It's a very exciting time for a lot of us right now.
Yeah, just quickly, one of the reasons why we're interested in this is because there's a very interesting cryptographic question when you're looking at signals. And so can we use some techniques from cryptography to try and analyze how animals are communicating? That's one of the things that Gaspar is doing, actually with someone who won a Turing Award for that kind of work. The other thing to say about this is that when deep neural networks that everyone's talking about now, producing large language models and so forth, one of the reasons they became popular is because in language translation, rather than assume that we knew the parts of speech, and there was a whole set of techniques called hidden Markov models that were applied to translating languages based on linguistic knowledge, what happened is they threw it all away, and they just used the raw acoustic signal and were able to do translation. And so there's a suggestion that maybe in some somewhat unsupervised way, we can use things like large language models to actually translate, or at least detect, combinatorial structure in, for example, cetacean communication. So there's new technology which is quite promising, I think.
I might mention just for a second that if any of you are interested, a paper came out today, and Roger Payne, who we mentioned before as one of the co-authors, with David Gruber and others from a group called the SETI group, C-E-T-I, and there's the SETI, S-E-T-I, that Brenda McCowan and others are working with as well. That's the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But this is the SETI group, C-E-T-I, and it's a paper that was published today in Nature Communications. And the group has been studying sperm whales. Gaspar, who was talking, is one of the team members. And what they've been able to do is take a very important first step. They've identified many of the units that sperm whales use in what they call click codas. These are codas made of clicks, wideband sounds. And it's been thought that they communicate using these codas, but they did a very beautiful paper describing some of the elements, 4 different elements that may be used in combination. They don't know what it means or how it functions yet, but this is an important first step.
I have to add the joke that one of the authors on this paper, David Gruber, he was asked what would be the first thing he would say to a whale if we successfully communicated with it, and he would say, "I'm sorry for industrial whaling. I'm sorry we killed you to extract oil from your head to make lipstick." And lamps.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Where are you going? Are you going? Yes. Right here.
Thank you. When you were talking about whistling with the dolphins, and you thought that you had maybe a name tag at the end, did you, the thought that came into my head was like, when we're trying to communicate but we don't know where anyone is, like on radio, we'll say like over and out or give some sort of like end stop. But in this case, it sounds like there might be some need for, I'm over here, or it's coming this way, or that, and that's my name or something. It might not just be naming, it might be something else. I don't know.
Thank you for saying that. So yeah, so far in the literature, people have looked at these signature whistles. They're contact calls. Most animals have contact calls. They signify where they are, maybe who they are as an identity. And for many animals, this is critical in mother-young contact and in keeping groups together for group cohesion. With the dolphins, it's been suggested that they serve as actual names for the animals. Actually, Brenda McGowan and I, Brenda was my first doctoral student, and we're collaborating again on a project to investigate the function of these signature whistles even more. We're doing that right now, but we also showed that aside from contact, because they are used for social group cohesion and identification, we don't know the function of these calls completely. Your suggestions are really interesting. Chris Clark at Cornell University made a suggestion that because these calls are generally repeated, it could let others in their social network out there know where they are, if they're moving towards them or away from them based on Doppler effects. There are many ways they could function. We're going to do a study to ask some other questions about the nature of these calls. There's a lot of unknowns right now.
Should we take one more and then let people go?
Is there any work done on seeing the opposite, meaning do the animals observe us when we are observing them and communicate about us?
Yeah, I think it's mutual. I mean, the timeout story that I started with is a good example of Circe, a dolphin, using a signal back. She had to be observing. And we see that other animals do observe us. I mean, if you think about, I think this is a nice way to end tonight. Many of you are pet owners, and you are communicating with your pets, and they are communicating back. We have patterns that we establish. If you have a dog, it can know what time of day you're going to feed it. It can watch your behavior, know you're walking to the door, you're picking up a leash. That may indicate a lot to an animal. The kinds of sounds we use. We used to think the sounds that we made to dogs were just, maybe they're getting something about emotion. But people who have studied the abilities of dogs to comprehend words have shown that dogs can actually learn over 100 words when they're trained. So animals have the ability to learn things if we teach them. What they're doing naturally is still a big question in terms of how they observe us and what they're pulling from that.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank